She didn't hang up. On the open line, I heard plans for a nursing home, and I started packing. I sit in a small apartment that smells like old wallpaper and forgotten meals, writing words I once thought no one would ever read. My fingers tremble, not from fear, but from the illness that has been taking little pieces of me for months. The doctors say there is still time, but time feels different when you are 65 and easy to overlook. This story started long before I got sick, back when I still lived in Sarah's house and tried to believe I belonged there. After Robert died, I spent 20 years in that place, cooking Sunday dinners for a dozen people, watching grandchildren learn to tie their shoes, being useful in the quiet way mothers learn to be. I thought useful meant loved. I learned it can also mean convenient. I hadn't asked what convenience would cost me. The signs were there if I had wanted to see them. Christmas photos where I somehow stood behind the camera instead of inside the frame. Birthday messages that arrived hours late, if they arrived at all. The way David looked through me at dinner like I was a sound the room had to tolerate. Little by little, I shifted from mother to burden, and the change was so slow that I barely noticed until it felt complete. I should have known what was coming when Sarah began to talk about my future as if I were not in the room to hear it. The hardest part was realizing how many small moments had been pointing to this. One Tuesday in March, I was getting ready for bed when Sarah called. We spoke about the children, the weather, nothing that mattered. We sounded like two people who had run out of honest sentences. That same night, I opened my closet and pulled out the old suitcase Robert bought me for our honeymoon to Niagara Falls 43 years ago. The leather is cracked now, but it still holds the scent of travel and a promise of wide roads. Behind the photo albums, I kept an envelope with $327 saved from my checks, folded one by one like tiny acts of hope. Inside that envelope was a bus ticket I had bought on a day when loneliness pressed so hard I could not breathe right. It was a ticket to Phoenix, where my sister Dorothy would have opened her door and her arms. I lost my nerve back then, afraid of abandoning Sarah, afraid of being called selfish. That ticket kept whispering to me like Robert used to do when I stalled, telling me it was time to stop waiting for permission to live. I thought silence would keep me safe. It only kept me small. Something small shifted everything I thought I knew about love. I packed what mattered in 20 minutes. The picture of Robert by the lake, my grandmother's pearl earrings, the recipe book with 4 decades of Sunday dinners written in my careful hand, and the letters Robert mailed from cheap hotel rooms when business trips took him away. Each letter had a coffee ring and a joke, and all of them reminded me that my life once had a center. I left before dawn, walking 8 blocks to the bus station while the suitcase bumped along the cracked sidewalks. A classified ad led me to a tired neighborhood, but Mrs. Chen, who owned a faded building, welcomed me with a soft nod. Her English was broken and her kindness was not. The apartment she offered was smaller than Sarah's closet, the window stuck on humid days, the wallpaper peeling at each corner, but for the first time in years, every square foot belonged to me. I didn't realize how quickly the silence would answer back. The silence was complete and a little frightening. I set the suitcase down and listened to the stillness. No footsteps, no doors closing in the next hallway, no one clearing a throat to remind me I was in the way. It felt like standing in a church after everyone left. I waited for someone to call and ask where I had gone. Silence felt safer than begging to stay. Nobody called. Not for 6 months. Not Sarah, not David, not the grandchildren who used to ask for stories. In my phone, there were 2 missed calls from the first week and then nothing. The service could have been cut and no one in that house would have noticed. Still, one line kept blinking in my memory. I wasn't vanishing. I was finally appearing to myself. I got sick in October. It began like a scratch in my throat and grew into something that used up my breath. I could not afford doctors or medicine, could not afford to be sick when being old and poor was already full-time work. I ignored it until breathing felt like a job I was no longer trained to do. I kept replaying the night of the open line. Sarah did not end the call. I heard the room on her end. David asked, in a tidy voice I knew too well, when she would finally deal with what he called the mother situation. He said the house felt different with me there all the time. He said they needed their space back. Sarah released that long, tired sigh I had learned to read and agreed that a nursing home made sense. They weighed costs and details and how to break the news gently so I would not make a scene. I did not make a sound. I set the phone down like it might bruise and walked to my room on legs that did not feel like mine. My heart pounded hard enough to rattle the door, though I understood with sudden clarity that nobody would care if it did. The walls felt like they belonged to strangers counting days until I was gone. I decided to appear to myself before I disappeared for them. I began to write on sleepless nights, at first small notes to Robert about a loneliness bigger than any house, then longer pieces about women like me, who had disappeared into other people's needs until they forgot they had names of their own. Words came the way water finds a crack. I wrote about the morning Sarah was born, and I held her for 6 straight hours, whispering promises I believed I would always keep. I wrote about swallowing my own disappointment to keep the peace, shrinking so others could feel bigger, mistaking being needed for being loved, and the way giving everything can still leave you with nothing. I kept the story of the open line without using anyone's exact words. The truth did not need quotation marks to be true. I showed a few pages to Mrs. Chen's nephew, Tommy, who worked at a small press. He read them at her kitchen table while we drank tea from mismatched cups. His eyes softened as he turned the last page. He said the pages felt honest and steady, like a handrail on a steep set of stairs. He asked for more. I kept writing. Winter dragged its feet across the city. The radiator hissed in the mornings. I learned the names of the birds that perched on the wire outside my window. I made soup on Fridays and changed the water in a jar of flowers twice a week. I saved for medicine, then for a better chair, then for nothing at all because the habit of saving felt like safety. I sent Tommy a full draft. The press said yes in a voice that shook a little. By March, almost a year after my last forgotten birthday, the book came out with a plain cover and a quiet title, Small Victories and Silent Battles. Reviews called it raw and clear. A local paper printed my picture above a story that used the word courage in a sentence with my name. A daytime show called to ask if I would speak about mothers who stop erasing themselves. Fame knocked at my door, but truth kept the chain across it. Listen close. This is the line I finally refused to cross. I cashed the first check and paid the rent early. I bought the medicine I had avoided. I slept through a night without coughing. Sarah called the day the book slipped onto a regional list. Her tone was warm the way a light is warm when you flip a switch. She asked about my health, my needs, whether I wanted to meet for coffee like we used to, though we never really used to. Behind each careful phrase, I heard the sound of a calculator. She wanted to know why I had not told her about the book, why the neighbors knew before she did. I told her I was busy. There were readings, interviews, and a life that finally fit. She offered to help manage things, to advocate, to mend time that could not be mended. I was surprised to hear myself laugh. It was not cruel. It was the sound of someone who had learned the difference between alone and lonely, between family and people who simply share your blood. On Fridays, I still bought chrysanthemums. That small ritual felt like peace. The apartment filled with books and music and the soft rustle of letters from readers who recognized themselves in my pages. When the doctors finally saw me, because I finally could pay to be seen, treatment had slipped out of reach. The scans were clear in their own hard way. There might be months. There would not be years. One Tuesday in April, Sarah came to my door with wet eyes and my book in her hands like a piece of evidence. She said she understood now. She wanted another chance. She wanted to matter in my story before the last chapter closed. I looked at her through the screen. She was beautiful in a polished way, but something in her gaze still reached past me toward a mirror only she could see. I thought about the chain on the door and what it meant to leave it in place. The book had become my legacy, a message for women who had traded their names for roles and were ready to trade back. I did not owe anyone a performance of forgiveness. Some love is a quiet wish. Some love is a boundary. I told her visiting hours had ended months ago. I kept my voice steady. I let the stillness do most of the work. What mattered next wasn't loud. It was firm. Some bridges burn. Others were never built to carry us anyway. She left expensive flowers on the step, the kind that try to apologize for things too big for words. I watched them soften at the edges. When the water turned, I carried them to the bin. The stems knocked once against plastic. Some seasons you plant. Some seasons you learn not every root deserves the effort of tending again. The readers began to call themselves the Invisible Army. They wrote to tell me they were drawing lines, finding apartments, starting classes, calling doctors, keeping keys. They said my pages felt like a porch light left on for anyone walking home late. I was proud to be there, an unexpected leader in a quiet fight against disappearing. The illness keeps its own calendar. Pill bottles line up like little houses on the counter. Mrs. Chen brings soup and sits while I rest between paragraphs. Tommy stops by with proofs and news about a second printing. He treats me like the author I never had the courage to imagine. I think of Robert when the window rattles at night. He used to steady me with a hand at the small of my back and remind me that fear is only a sign to move carefully, not a command to stop. I had buried that voice under years of saying yes when I meant no, of staying quiet when I wanted to insist. I am not afraid now. My story lives in quiet rooms where readers turn pages and decide their own lives are worth the trouble. Sarah still calls sometimes. The machine answers. I listen later if I have the energy. Some bridges burn to save a town. Others were never built strong enough to carry what we ask them to hold. I write in the afternoons while the light slants across the wallpaper. I tire easily, but my voice grows stronger on the page. There's a kind of sweet anger in that, and a kind of peace. I found myself just as I began to lose everything else. I discovered my worth at the exact moment the world expected me to fade. They once mistook my quiet for an empty room. It turns out quiet can be a full life you finally get to keep. I thought the ending would break me. Almost. Under the flowers lay a spare key I'd never given her. If you were in my chair this afternoon, would you unlatch the chain or keep your peace?